The mysterious death of the Cranberries lead singer Dolores O'Riordan. The 90s rock star died in a London hotel Monday at just 46 years old.
She had one of the most unforgettable voices of the 1990s, fragile yet fierce, angelic yet haunting. Dolores O'Riordan, the magnetic frontwoman of the Cranberries, wasn't just a rock star. She became a symbol of Ireland's cultural resurgence. Her music, raw with pain and passion, continues to echo across generations. But behind the soaring choruses and global acclaim lay a more complicated story, one marked by childhood trauma, relentless pressure, and private battles that never truly healed. This is the untold journey of a voice that carried both brilliance and unbearable weight. A country girl with secrets. Dolores Mary Eileen O'Riordan came into the world on September 6, 1971 in Ballybricken, a quiet stretch of countryside just outside of Limerick, Ireland. She was the youngest of 7 children in a working-class family. Her father, Terence, had been a farm laborer until a severe accident left him unable to work, leaving much of the responsibility to her mother, Eileen. Life in their 2-bedroom cottage was far from glamorous. It was crowded, modest, and anchored by the values of faith, resilience, and family loyalty. From the beginning, Dolores seemed different, small and shy, yet carrying an energy that set her apart. Her upbringing was steeped in Catholic tradition. The church was not just a place of worship, but the center of community life. By the age of 12, Dolores was playing the church organ and singing Gregorian hymns, developing the skills that would shape her haunting vocal style. She wasn't raised on the music of rock icons or radio hits, but on classical sounds and the melodies of religious chants. She once admitted she didn't even grow up around much popular music at all. Her early world was instead cloaked in solemn church songs and the rhythms of rural life. It is true that, in spite of this cocooned environment, Dolores showed signs of creative craziness. She was, after all, a weak 5-year-old when the nursery teacher had her up on the piano before class and asked her to sing. The voice that came forth was breathtaking, and such episodes were to accompany her through her teenage years, with many pointing out what she had to offer, long before some of them realized it. By the time she was 12, she was writing songs. The first one was called Calling, and it came from the mixed-up experience of being a child infatuated with an older man. Even then, she turned life into music, almost by intuition. But underneath the innocence of her rural upbringing lay a darkness that she carried in silence. Beginning while she was still a child, for 4 years, Dolores was sexually violated by an older man. It was a secret she stuffed deep inside, never revealing it until many decades later. This abuse, together with the accident that left her father brain-damaged, shaped her in ways no one saw around her. She later confessed to Rolling Stone that, "I have a lot of secrets about my childhood." Those secrets, and the pain that walked hand in hand with them, became the fuel for her lyrics and the emotional weight in her singing. There were other incidents of trauma as well. When she was 7 years old, her sister accidentally set their house on fire, and it burned down. Seeing her home consumed by flames made Dolores feel uneasy that life could slip away at any moment. For such a young child, these moments created a bonding juxtaposition of fragility and strength. She learned to cope with pain, but the scars of that pain traveled on to her adult life. Being the only girl in a brood of 5 brothers, Dolores often felt that she had to fight harder for attention. She would later recall how Irish families, like her own, seemed to be partial to boys, while girls were expected to be charming, dress well, or sing if they wanted some recognition. For Dolores, that only pushed her to be bolder. She became an outspoken girl, spending more time with the boys and developing a fiercely independent attitude that would later mark her career as a performer and songwriter. The bond with her mother, which had everything attached to it, was good as well. Eileen wished that when Dolores decided on a career in music teaching, but yes, despite the strictness, she was a loving parent. Dolores, however, had bigger dreams, though even she could not have imagined the scale of what was to come. The affectionate space at home, the authoritative Catholic life, and the secrets that she bore within her caused her to have a tension that could only be released through music, pouring it out. Little did anyone know, the quiet girl from Ballybricken would soon become the voice of a generation. From Ballybricken to global fame. By the late 1980s, Dolores O'Riordan was already known in her local circles as the quiet girl with the extraordinary voice. But the turning point came in 1990, when she heard through a friend that a Limerick-based band, then known as Cranberries, saw us, needed a new lead singer. Their previous frontman, Niall Quinn, had left, and the band, composed of brothers Noel and Mike Hogan on guitar and bass, and their schoolmate Fergal Lawler on drums, were searching for a fresh voice to match their evolving sound. Dolores showed up at the audition in a pink tracksuit, lugging her keyboard across town. The moment she sang, the room changed. Noel Hogan recalled later how he and the others were stunned that this small, shy woman from Ballybricken carried such power in her voice. She didn't just sing, she transformed the music. At the audition, she was given a backing track with a simple chord progression and asked to work on it. A week later, she returned with a finished melody and lyrics, what would become Linger, a song destined to define their early career. With that, Dolores O'Riordan secured her place as their frontwoman, and the band had its missing piece. The name Cranberries Saw Us, a pun on cranberry sauce, didn't last for long. Upon mailing out demos, one was apparently sent to the Cranberries by mistake. The catchy, shorter name stuck, and from then on, the identity of the band began to share the limelight. Their demos soon attracted the interest of some industry insiders, and it was not long before a number of record labels came knocking. In 1991, the Cranberries signed on with the Island Records label, already reputed to have nurtured some very distinct voices like U2. Their early recordings, however, were characterized by a bit of turbulence. Their debut EP, Uncertain, slipped by largely unnoticed, and the early sessions at a would-be full-length album were hindered by producers trying to push the band into trends that felt solemnly contrary to their inherent style. Out of frustration with this, they chose to replace their producer with Stephen Street, who had worked with the Smiths. Under his guidance, they found the clarity that had been elusive before. Thus, in the year 1993, this band released its very first album, Everybody Else Is Doing It, So Why Can't We? The entire content of the album was polished by Dolores during her years of adolescence and early adulthood, bearing marks of youthful longing, pallid vulnerability, and deep heartbreak. Some of these tracks include Dreams and Linger, which are significations of very personal yet universal experiences of love and loss. Dolores's voice, unlike any others in the charts, was fragile yet soaring, intimate yet powerful. The album made no immediate waves in Europe, but across the Atlantic, it found ready listeners. Within no time, Dream was the taped single on college radio, and soon could be seen on music videos on MTV. Linger was a breakout hit within months and transformed the Cranberries into an up-and-coming band in America. Less than 2 years later, the album topped the charts in the UK and quickly followed suit throughout the rest of the world. It would eventually sell more than 6 million copies worldwide. For Dolores, this sudden rise was overwhelming. She had gone from a country girl in rural Ireland to fronting one of the biggest new bands in the world almost overnight. She later admitted she was shocked by the attention, never expecting her deeply personal songs to resonate so widely. But it was precisely her authenticity, her refusal to hide emotion, that connected her with listeners. The Cranberries weren't just another alternative band. They had a sound that was tender yet raw, and at the center of it all was Dolores's unforgettable voice. But it was their second album that turned Dolores into not just a singer, but a voice for a wounded nation. Zombie and a Global Spotlight. By 1994, the Cranberries had already tasted success, but their sophomore album would push them into a different league altogether. The band had been touring relentlessly, and while their debut was still climbing charts, Dolores O'Riordan was already channeling new emotions into her songwriting. Among these was a track that would become the most defining of their career, a song born not of romance or heartbreak, but of anger, grief, and the political violence that scarred her homeland. That song was Zombie. The spark came on March 20th, 1993, when two bombs hidden in garbage bins exploded on a busy shopping street in Warrington, England. The attacks, linked to the Irish Republican Army during the Troubles, slain two young boys, Jonathan Ball, aged 3, and Tim Parry, aged 12. Dozens more were injured. Dolores, then on tour in London with the band, was devastated when she heard the news. The images of children slain in senseless violence haunted her. Instead of staying silent, she picked up her guitar and began writing what would become one of the most haunting protest songs of the decade. The song was raw, blunt, and unflinching, with lyrics like, "Another head hangs lowly, child is slowly taken." Dolores turned grief and fury into a cry for peace. Heavy, in contrast to the sweet tunes Linger and Dreams, Zombie was driven by thunderous guitars and pounding drums. Dolores had called for an even harder, louder, angrier performance because the subject matter demanded it. This was no love song. It was a cry against the cycle of violence tearing families apart in Northern Ireland. The song was not feted by all, however. There were reports that the band's label, Island Records, offered Dolores $1 million to record a different single, fearing that Zombie's political message might turn audiences away. She would not hear of it. As her manager recalls, Dolores ripped the check up without a second thought and insisted on releasing Zombie just as it was. And her conviction was vindicated. It became an anthem when Zombie was released as a single in the month of September 1994. The accompanying music video, directed by Samuel Bayer, famed for Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit, was just as powerful. It intercuts British soldiers patrolling scenes with that of a gold-painted Dolores, standing among children painted as silver cherubs. One strikingly biblical imagery underscoring innocence lost through violence, while MTV placed the video on heavy rotation. And suddenly, the Cranberries were no longer just another alternative rock band, they were global icons with something to say. The song topped the charts in different countries such as Germany and Australia, and became an important song in the repertoire of rock radio all around the globe. It helped catapult their second album, No Need to Argue, to almost unbelievably massive heights, with sales of almost 20 million copies around the world, signaling the Cranberries' establishment as one of the defining bands of the 90s. But more than that, Zombie proved that Dolores could put down both vulnerability and fury, thus making her voice not only haunting, but commanding as well. Later, Dolores would explain that Zombie wasn't political propaganda. It was a call to humanity. She grew weary of the violence committed in the name of a place she loved so dearly. "It's not me, it's not my family," she sang, cleansing herself and many others from the path of the extremists. For that reason, to audiences around the world, and many of whom were unfamiliar with the Troubles, It was a penetrating introduction to the human cost of the conflict. Still, that song changed everything. At the pinnacle of her fame, yet fame and activism came at a cost. Behind the anthems, Dolores was already fighting personal demons. Cracks behind the fame. The mid-1990s should have been a time of celebration for Dolores O'Riordan and the Cranberries. Zombie had cemented them as global superstars, and their album No Need to Argue was selling millions worldwide. They performed at Woodstock '94, recorded a celebrated MTV Unplugged session, and graced magazine covers from the US to Europe. To the outside world, Dolores was living every musician's dream. But fame often hides fractures, and behind the spotlight, cracks were already spreading through both the band and Dolores herself. Endless touring quickly took its toll. By 1996, the Cranberries had circled the globe multiple times in just 3 years, barely taking breaks between shows, press interviews, and studio sessions. Dolores's voice, so central to their success, was pushed to its limits. On stage, she remained a magnetic performer, but off stage, she was exhausted, physically and emotionally. She later admitted that the relentless schedule left her feeling detached from reality. She began to hate performing, even though singing was the very thing that had once given her purpose. The media also became a source of conflict. At first hailed as Ireland's next great musical export, the Cranberries quickly grew wary of the British press, which often fueled rumors of infighting and looming breakups. In 1996, one British tabloid falsely reported that Dolores had performed on stage without underwear during a show in Germany. Furious, she sued the paper, which later issued an apology and paid damages. While Dolores donated the money to charity, the experience hardened her distrust of journalists and intensified her feelings of vulnerability under the public gaze. That much seemed to be private life because, in 1994, she married Don Burton, who worked as a tour manager for Duran Duran. For a while, this brought her stability and a most welcome sense of protection, even though the outside world's noise seemed to bleed into her private world. In the late 90s, Dolores gave birth to her first child. Being a mother was a source of happiness, but it also contributed to the pressure of trying to balance being a full-time mother with the full-on pace of the Cranberries. By 1996, while working on their third album, The Faithful Departed, cracks had begun to appear. The album did moderately well. However, critics made some unkind judgments, and the band attested to their burnout. The record was darker in its themes, war and death. It reflected Dolores's increasingly dark frame of mind. Songs like Salvation were direct responses to the barrage of substance-related deaths in music during that time. But the critics dismissed the political angle as childish. It was as if she was feeling weighed down by the expectations laid upon her and the personal battles she was facing. An oppressive weight with which she felt caught between the struggle of stardom and the desires of a simple life. The To the Faithful Departed tour could not have ended in greater disaster, with Dolores injuring her knee, leading to the cancellation of shows and months of recuperation. Officially, her health problems were the reason for the cancellation. But somewhere in private, she was hurting badly. Dolores, years later in interviews, revealed that she actually had a mental breakdown during that time. She confessed to stage hatred, band hatred, and longing for a simple life, being a grocer or hairdresser while living far away from cameras and fans, waking up, making her own toast, and calling a friend like she used to in Ballybricken. Fame had given her everything she ever wanted, but in actuality, it had slain her peace. To fans, none of this showed. To them, she was still Dolores, the courageous performer who could hush the world with her breath or bellow at it with a roar. But behind the scenes, the cost of success was becoming increasingly unbearable. The struggle against exhaustion and the continuous drumming of the media was difficult, even gut-wrenching. But these were merely surface symptoms of a much deeper pain. But what the public couldn't see was that these struggles were rooted in a far older wound, one she had carried since childhood. The weight of her demons. For much of the 1990s, Dolores O'Riordan kept her inner struggles hidden from the public eye. She was the face of a band adored worldwide, the voice behind some of the decade's most powerful songs. Yet, beneath the success, she was fighting battles that fame could neither silence nor heal. These were not simply the pressures of celebrity. They were the return of shadows she had carried since childhood. Dolores would later reveal that from the age of 8 until around 12, she endured years of sexual exploitation by an older man she trusted. She kept the trauma buried for decades, never speaking of it until adulthood. But the wound never closed. It manifested in anxiety, depression, and feelings of self-loathing that followed her into her teens and adulthood. For Dolores, songwriting became an outlet, a way to process emotions she couldn't express otherwise. Still, the scars remained. In the early 2000s, with the Cranberries slowing down, Dolores came face to face with the demons. In 2011, her father's death forced her to go to the funeral, where she saw her childhood abuser for the first time in years. He apologized, but the confrontation reopened old scars. Dolores would later confess that it triggered a downward spiral of depression and emotional breakdown. Her battles with mental health had grown darker. She fought anorexia, alcoholism, panic attacks, and self-harm ideations. In interviews, she described bouts of insomnia during which she could not sleep at night for all the racing thoughts. In 2012, she attempted an overdose, which she would later describe as the turning point of her life. It was an act of desperation. After surviving, she began reassessing her life. Her love for her 3 children, Taylor, Molly, and Dakota, became her lifeline. She said she realized she had to live for them, no matter how heavy her own pain felt. Struggles in Dolores's life were beginning to garner public attention. In 2014, she had been arrested after creating trouble on a flight from New York to Ireland. She had gone on a tirade against some crew members, yelling words to the effect of, "I'm an icon. I'm the Queen of Limerick." Dolores later headbutted one policeman and spat at another. The incident became headline news all around the world. But behind what was shocking behavior was a woman who had come to her breaking point. Eileen, Dolores's mother, told the press that the outburst could have been triggered by something other than substances or alcohol, stress, and the collapse of her nearly 20-year marriage to Don Burton. Dolores was placed under the care of a psychiatrist, where she was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This diagnosis was a revelation for Dolores, as it provided an explanation for erratic moods, impulsive behavior, and crushing lows over the last years. Bipolar disorder required a careful management plan with medical support all the time. There were days when she was optimistic and creative about her music, while on other days, the weight of the pain was almost too much to bear. Dolores was entirely forthright about her suffering. In interviews, she let slip that she had felt very dark inside and that music was her only means of coping. She confessed her aversion to people because of the torture, yet was expected to stand in front of thousands of them. Her soul battled with the duality of fame in public versus internal despair, to be honored on stage when all alone she felt broken inside. And yet, even as her battles deepened, Dolores kept returning to her faith and her art. A fragile recovery. Even in her darkest moments, Dolores O'Riordan held tightly to the faith instilled in her during her rural Irish upbringing. Raised in a devout Catholic household, She often spoke about how her beliefs shaped her worldview. To her, spirituality was more than ritual. It was a source of comfort, a lifeline she reached for when trauma and depression threatened to consume her. "I believe in God and an afterlife," she once said, adding that she often dreamt of her late father and felt he visited her from another dimension. These convictions gave her a sense that death was not an end, but a continuation into another space where peace might finally exist. Her artistry was also influenced by faith. Longing, redemption, and spiritual searching ran rampant in many of her songs, even if appropriately dressed in alternative rock arrangements. She frequently used religious imagery in the lyrics of her songs. The conflict between despair and hope was an oft-invoked motif. While other artists denounced their childhood faith with the arrival of fame, Dolores, instead, still grappled with this faith, trying to reconcile its often harsh tenets with her own struggles. Resilience is another pillar of Dolores's identity. With trauma weighing heavily on her, she would always find a way to rise again and again. After she was arrested in 2014, she accepted the treatment and initiated her bipolar diagnosis, thereby making sense of the warfare within. Her children remained her anchor. During interviews, she mentioned that, without them, she may not have made it through her darkest times. Taylor, Molly, and Dakota gave her something no audience would: unconditional love. Therapies also included music. The Cranberries reformed in 2009 after several years, releasing Roses in 2012. The music world had changed completely during the years they had been gone, but fans welcomed them back wholeheartedly. Dolores seemed rejuvenated by her collaboration with long-lost, once-family bandmates. There were still sparks, and even as she privately battled her demons, the onstage experience reminded her of the happiness that ultimately comes from music. In 2016, alongside ex-Smiths bassist Andy Rourke, she would try yet another experiment outside the Cranberries by forming a brand new group called DARMY-RK. It suggested she was fighting to create something every day she was blessed to see as another 24 hours, despite the storm brewing inside her. Her creativity was alive, still battling to come out of her through sound. It was around 2017 that Dolores was settling down. She returned to the Cranberries for the acoustic album Something Else, which repositioned previously released songs with orchestral arrangements. She even went on about how much fun it was to reminisce about songs she had written while a teenager, now performing them as a woman in her 40s with many life experiences. Those who worked with her during that time say she was more stable due mainly to the right mix of medication and therapy. Bandmates called her a whole lot more herself, the laughing and optimistic one during rehearsals. Hopeful about the future owing to faith and resilience, recovery was constantly tenuous. Dolores noted that bipolar disorder offered good days and bad days, inspiration and despair. Yet, through it all, she believed she could manage it. In late 2017, she was set to record another album with DARK and record vocals for the Bad Wolves cover of Zombie. Just before her death, she left an enthusiastic voicemail for a record company executive regarding her children and creative projects. It really seemed for a brief moment as though she balanced it all. But just when it seemed like she had turned a corner, fate delivered its most devastating blow: a lasting legacy. On the morning of January 15, 2018, Dolores O'Riordan was found lifeless in a London hotel bathroom. She was only 46 years old. News of her sudden passing sent shockwaves across the globe. Fans who had grown up with Linger, Dreams, and Zombie struggled to process that the voice that had defined so many of their memories was silenced forever. For those closest to her, the loss was unimaginable. The coroner's report revealed that Dolores had died from accidental drowning due to alcohol intoxication. Prescription substances were also found in her system, but all at therapeutic levels. The conclusion was heartbreaking. Her death wasn't the result of intent, but of a fragile body and mind finally overwhelmed. It was the kind of tragic end that so often seems to haunt the most sensitive, gifted souls, those who carry both brilliance and unbearable pain. The very moment hope seemed at hand, she passed away.
Okay, Janways, and send my love to Irene. I still have that leather jacket. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
She seemed to read about projects lined up for her. It was even out for the tracking of vocals for Bad Wolves' cover of Zombie, which she'd specifically approved herself. She spoke about her children with joy, and even sang a line out through the phone from Bittersweet Symphony, full of life. Fans and colleagues are grieving and disbelieving because those haunting words have been optimized. What is optimistic would be compared with what comes hours later. Bad Wolves finished and released their cover of Zombie within days of her departure. It went on to become a worldwide hit, topping charts and further introducing her legacy to a new generation. The band lived up to their word by donating $250,000 in proceeds to the singer's children. No matter how meaningful this gesture was, however, the band members were uncomfortable with the release of the song just shortly after her death. Guitarist Noel Hogan said it felt a bit too soon, while drummer Fergal Lawler admitted he didn't like the version. Still, the moment underscored the power of Dolores' songwriting and the timelessness of her message. Grief, almost heavy enough to wreck the body, engulfed the Cranberries. They took the post-Dolores route and decided to end one final album using vocal demos. The real masterpiece, though, was In the End, which was already released in 2019 to come both as goodbye and as tribute, making much weight of the fragility and beauty of Dolores' final performances. Built on Grammy nomination and critical acclaim, it closed the chapter of the band on a high, dignified, and loving note. After that release, the remaining members revealed their decision to split with the Cranberries, as their homage to Dolores as the one and only musical heart of their. With these sales and charts, Dolores' legacy lives on. One woman in the mainstream of alternative rock in the 1990s was the frontwoman of a band, and did so on her own. Global stardom, slash-and-grab vulnerability, raw power, and haunting Irish inflection made the voice instantly recognizable. Songs like Zombie became anthems of sorts advocating for peace, while Linger and Dreams captured the tender feelings of youth. Above all else, it was real music, birthed out of pain, love, and faith. Dolores O'Riordan's story is one of triumph, trauma, and tragedy. A reminder that even the brightest voices can be silenced too soon. If you were moved by her journey, make sure to like this video, leave a comment sharing your favorite Cranberries song, and subscribe for more deep dives into the untold stories of music's legends. And don't forget, check out the next video on screen for another story of music's brightest stars whose lives ended far too soon.